For most people in the Middle Ages, life was uncertain in ways we can barely imagine today. And perhaps that is why, in taverns, monasteries, and quiet homes, people turned to games of chance. Small moments where uncertainty could finally be held in the palm of a hand. Tonight, we begin in a quiet stone courtyard in late medieval Europe. The sun has just dipped below the tiled roofs, and the air is cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Somewhere beyond the walls, a church bell marks the passing of the hour, and in the fading light, beneath an archway worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, a pair of dice roll softly across a wooden bench. They are small, bone perhaps, polished by many hands, and though they seem harmless, they carry with them an entire world. Gambling in the Middle Ages was not loud in the way we imagine modern gaming halls to be. There were no glowing signs, no chiming machines. Instead, there were murmured wagers beside hearth fires, quiet games in monastery guest houses, sailors casting lots in dockside taverns, and nobles leaning across carved tables in torchlit chambers. It was not luxury. It was ritual, habit, distraction, and sometimes survival. Our story begins in a modest town in northern Italy in the late 13th century. The streets are narrow and uneven, paved in worn stone that still holds the day's warmth. Linen banners hang from upper windows. The smell of bread lingers from a nearby bakery, though the ovens are now cooling for the night. Inside a tavern near the town gate, several men sit at a thick oak table. A single oil lamp flickers, its flame bending slightly whenever the door opens to admit a draft. The light is dim, golden, uncertain. Smoke from the hearth gathers near the beams overhead, darkening them year after year. One man shakes a small leather cup. Inside, dice. He pauses a moment before casting them onto the table. The sound is soft, wood against bone, a click and roll. It is a simple game. Highest number wins. But even here, in something so small, there is tension. Not sharp tension. Not danger. Just the quiet awareness that a few copper coins might change hands tonight. And here is something gentle, something easily overlooked. Dice were among the most common objects found in medieval archaeological sites. They were made from bone, antler, wood, even carved from ivory when wealth allowed. Roman soldiers had played with them. Monks sometimes owned them. Even kings were known to indulge. Because uncertainty has always fascinated people. In truth, medieval life was full of forces beyond control. Weather, illness, harvest failure. When so much was uncertain, perhaps rolling dice felt honest. A small, contained way to meet chance face to face. Outside the tavern, the night deepens. A woman carrying a basket of kindling walks past the shuttered windows. She hears the murmur of men inside, the occasional soft thud of dice. She does not pause. She has other rituals to attend to, banking the hearth, stirring pottage, folding wool blankets near the fire. Inside, the men continue. One of them loses 3 throws in a row. He exhales slowly. Not anger, just resignation. He rubs his hands together for warmth. The tavern is never truly warm in winter. The hearth heats only those closest to it. Those at the edges feel the draft creep along the floor. Comfort always came at a price. Sit too close to the fire, and your eyes sting from smoke. Sit too far, and your fingers stiffen with cold. And so they play, adjusting stools, pulling cloaks tighter, living in that constant medieval balance between warmth and discomfort. Now we shift, gently, across the Alps. In a Swiss mountain pass, a group of merchants rests inside a stone inn built against the wind. Their boots are damp from snowmelt. A pot of barley stew simmers near the hearth, thick and plain. Outside, their pack animals stamp in the cold. Trade routes like these, stretching from Italy toward France and the German lands, carried more than spices and cloth. They carried games. Merchants were some of the great carriers of leisure. Alongside bolts of silk and sacks of pepper traveled carved gaming boards, painted playing cards, knucklebones polished smooth from use. Playing cards, in particular, were a quiet revolution. They appeared in Europe in the late 14th century, likely traveling westward from Islamic lands. At first, they were hand-painted, delicate, expensive. Nobles commissioned sets decorated with gold leaf and intricate symbols. But gradually, as woodblock printing improved, cards became more common. And with cards came new kinds of gambling. In that mountain inn, one merchant unwraps a cloth bundle and reveals a deck. The suits are not yet the hearts and spades we know. They are cups, swords, coins, batons. The imagery is simple but elegant. They deal the cards slowly, deliberately. Unlike dice, cards introduce memory, strategy, the illusion, perhaps, of control. And here is where curiosity grows gently. In medieval Europe, authorities often tried to ban gambling. City councils passed laws forbidding dice games during holy days. Kings issued decrees restricting wagers. But the bans rarely lasted. Why? Because gambling was not simply vice. It was woven into social life. Soldiers played between campaigns. Apprentices gambled away small wages. Even clergy were occasionally reprimanded for gaming in cloisters. It was not rebellion. It was human. Back in the Italian town, our tavern grows quieter. A log collapses in the hearth with a soft sigh of sparks. One by one, players count their remaining coins. Some have gained a little. Some have lost. No one is ruined tonight. The stakes were small, bread money, perhaps, or enough to buy an extra cup of wine tomorrow. But imagine the sensation in their hands, the weight of coins warm from another's palm, the faint clink as they stack them. Money itself in this era feels different. It is heavy, tangible. Silver denarii, copper grosso. Each coin represents real labor, days in a field, hours at a forge. To risk it is not casual. And yet they do, because life offers few diversions after dark. There are no printed novels for the common man. No theater every evening. Candlelight is precious. Firewood must be conserved. Games fill the long winter nights. Now let us move south. To Venice. The air here smells of salt and brine. Lanterns reflect in the black water of canals. Gondolas knock gently against mooring posts. The city hums softly even after sunset. Venice was one of the first European cities to formalize gambling into something closer to what we might call a casino. In 1638, much later than our current moment, but born from centuries of gaming tradition, the Ridotto opened. It was not yet the glittering halls of Monte Carlo centuries later. It was a controlled public gambling house, sanctioned by the government during carnival season. And here lies an interesting truth. The first casinos were often created not to encourage gambling, but to regulate it. Authorities realized that gambling would happen regardless of prohibition. So they contained it, controlled it, taxed it. Inside the Ridotto, masks were worn. Nobles in fine brocade played basetta and baribi beneath chandeliers of glass. Servants moved quietly between tables. The air carried perfume instead of tavern smoke. But even here, the same balance remained. Warmth from candles, left-right arrow, risk of fire. Luxury fabrics, left-right arrow, suffocating heat. Excitement, left-right arrow, quiet ruin. A nobleman might win a fortune in an hour, or lose the dowry of his daughter. And yet, despite risk, people returned. Because gambling offered something rare in rigid medieval and early modern societies. A sudden shift in status. Peasant could not easily become noble. A merchant could not easily become king. But in a single throw of dice, in a single dealt hand, anyone might rise briefly above expectation. It was not fairness. It was possibility. Back in our quiet tavern in northern Italy, the night draws to a close. The oil lamp burns low, its wick trimmed carefully to save precious fuel. The tavern keeper sweeps rushes across the floor, pushing stray nutshells and crumbs toward the hearth. Outside, frost begins to form along the edges of stone gutters. The men step into the cold, cloaks wrapped tight. Some feel light-hearted, some feel thoughtful, but all of them carry with them the same simple memory, the sound of dice rolling across wood. Small objects, soft sounds, moments of chance in a world ruled mostly by necessity. And as you rest here, listening, imagine the gentle rhythm of it. The shake of a leather cup, the roll, the pause, the counting. No urgency, no flashing lights, just the steady pulse of human curiosity meeting uncertainty in candlelight. The fire burns low, the coins are gathered, the night is quiet, and somewhere in another town, beneath another roof of wood and tile, dice are rolling again. The night continues in a slow, steady way, as if the darkness itself is in no hurry. A thin mist sits low over the road outside the town walls, and the stones of the lane feel cold beneath the soles of worn shoes. Somewhere a dog turns in its sleep. Somewhere a latch clicks as a household settles in for the night, pulling a wooden bar across a door, not because danger feels close, but because drafts do. And inside the town, in a quieter quarter where workshops stand shoulder to shoulder, a different kind of gambling begins. Smaller, softer, almost ordinary. Not a grand wager, just a habit. A shoemaker's apprentice sits on a stool beside a workbench, turning a copper coin between thumb and forefinger. The workshop smells of leather scraps and tallow, of damp wool hung near a hearth to dry. The day's work has ended, but the place still feels alive with the memory of it. Tools laid out, awls and knives, coils of thread, a half-finished shoe with its sole pinned tight. Across from him, another apprentice holds a small board scratched with lines. It is not a fine gaming board, not painted or carved. It is just wood, cut from a scrap plank, marked with charcoal. That is how it often was. In the Middle Ages, games did not always require special equipment. People used what they had: pieces of broken pottery, pebbles, buttons, carved bits of bone. Sometimes the board was simply drawn on the table with chalk or scratched into the surface with a knife. And here is one of those small, natural facts that slips in quietly. Many medieval tables, benches, and even church stone steps still bear carved game boards, simple grids, circles, and lines. People passed time wherever they could. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Waiting was part of life then. Waiting for bread to bake. Waiting for rain to stop. Waiting for daylight in winter. Waiting for a master to return. For a cart to be unloaded. For a bell to ring. Today, people fill waiting with glowing screens. Back then, they filled it with hands, coins, dice, and patience. The apprentices begin their game. It is calm. Their shoulders relax. The coin, when it is wagered, feels heavier than it would today. Not because copper weighs more, but because each coin feels closer to its origin. Someone mined the ore. Someone smelted it. Someone struck it, pressing a ruler's stamp into metal. Someone earned it by lifting, hauling, sewing, scraping, stirring, grinding. A single coin is never abstract. It is physical effort. The first round is quiet. The second round is quiet. But then comes the gentle hook, the kind that tugs at curiosity without turning into drama. A third apprentice appears in the doorway. He does not speak right away. He simply watches. His cloak is slightly damp. His cheeks are pink from cold air. He smells faintly of smoke, as if he has just come from a different hearth. And he says, almost casually, "They're doing it in the square again. The others glance up, not alarmed, interested, because the square could mean many things. A market, a gathering, a place where news travels faster than letters. And this toggle underscore, this tiny mention, again, suggests routine. So they rise, pulling their cloaks close, and step into the night. The town square is not empty, not fully. Even late, there is movement. A night watchman's slow steps, a few late drinkers, a woman hurrying home with a basket covered in cloth to keep the warmth in. And near the edge of the square, beneath an overhanging roof where stalls stand folded and silent, a small crowd has formed. Not large. A dozen people, perhaps. A man sits at a portable table. The table is simple but sturdier than most. Its legs fold. The surface is smooth from use. Beside it sits a small box, and inside the box, coins. He is a fairground gambler. A familiar figure in towns and on pilgrimage roads. He does not shout. He does not need to. His voice is low and practiced, and his hands do most of the talking. In the center of the table is a cloth marked with symbols. A small cup, a knife, a ring, a simple star. He holds a small object, maybe a pebble, maybe a carved bead, and he places it under one of 3 wooden cups. Then he moves the cups, slowly, deliberately. This is not frantic, not wild. It is almost hypnotic, the way a candle flame can hold the eye. People lean in. A woman with a shawl tight around her head whispers a guess. A man in a rough wool cap places down a coin with a faint clink. And here is where the medieval casino begins to feel closer, not in architecture but in atmosphere. The shared focus, the hush, the mild heat of bodies pressed close in cold air, the small thrill of maybe. But also, quietly, the compromise. Stand too close, and your breath mixes with others in the damp night air. Stand too far, and you cannot see the cups clearly. Comfort and risk are always braided together. And the truth, spoken softly, is that many street gambling games were not fair. Not because medieval people were more dishonest than modern people, but because without regulation, and with poverty close at hand, the temptation to cheat was strong. A traveling gambler might need coin for food and lodging. A few extra winnings might keep him from sleeping outdoors. That is not an excuse, just a kind of realism. Not luxury. Survival. Someone wins. A small cheer. Not loud. Someone loses. A small shrug. No one is dragged away. No one is ruined. But each loss still matters. And as the apprentices watch, one of them notices something. A detail in the man's hands. The way his fingers pause. The way the cup lifts a fraction more smoothly than it should. It is subtle, almost invisible, but it plants a seed of thought. This is another gentle truth. Medieval people were not naive. They learned quickly. They watched hands. They listened for tricks. They knew in their bones that the world often demanded attention. A life without guarantees teaches you to confirm what you think you see. The apprentices do not accuse. They simply watch longer. And then quietly they drift away. Because the night offers other places too, other kinds of gambling, some more lawful, some more private. We move now to a manor house outside the town, set among fields and low hedges. The building is not a towering castle. It is a solid home with stone lower walls and timber above, a place built for management and living rather than siege. Inside, the air is warmer but not perfectly. The hearth brings heat, yes, but also smoke. Tallow candles add light, but also soot. Thick tapestries soften drafts, but also hold dust. Every comfort has a shadow. In the main room, a small group sits at a table that is far finer than the apprentice's scratched plank. The surface is smooth, perhaps even inlaid. A servant brings wine in a clay jug and pours carefully. Here, the game is cards. Not the simplest kind, something more sophisticated. A nobleman holds his hand close to his chest, his expression calm. A lady's fingers rest lightly on the edge of the table. She wears a veil or linen cap, not for dramatic effect, but because indoor spaces in winter are still cold. A young clerk, literate, observant, keeps track of wagers. This matters because wealthy gambling often required record-keeping. Not everyone carried enough coin to cover a large loss on the spot. Debts could be noted and paid later. And here comes a small, steady microfact. In many places, gambling debts were treated differently from other debts. Some legal traditions considered them dishonorable or unenforceable, while others allowed them, especially when the players were of status. Laws varied by city, kingdom, and century. But almost everywhere, authorities worried about the same thing. Explained simply, gambling could move money too quickly, upsetting households and reputations. Tonight, in this manner, the stakes are not ruinous. They are performative enough to make the game feel sharp, but not enough to destroy the estate. Even so, a quiet micro-conflict appears. One man wants more light to see his cards clearly. Another complains that more candles mean more smoke and higher fire risk. So they compromise. A servant trims the wick, moves the candle slightly, places it in a safer holder. A small adjustment, a calm solution, but it reminds you again. In the past, even simple note at night had hazards. Today you flip a switch. Back then you negotiated with flame. The game continues. Cards slide softly on wood. Wine warms throats. The room smells of beeswax, wool, and faintly of roasted onions from supper earlier. A hand is played. Someone wins. Someone laughs softly, more relieved than triumphant. And now, gently, we shift again because gambling in the Middle Ages was not a single location or class. It was movement. So we go to the road. Pilgrimage route, perhaps. A track of packed earth winding through low hills. A group of travelers rests at a wayside hospice. One of those guest houses run by religious orders or local benefactors, meant to shelter the tired and keep them from sleeping in ditches. Inside, the mood is quieter than the tavern, calmer than the manor. A monk passes with a lantern, his steps slow, careful on stone. In one corner, travelers play a small game, knucklebones, maybe. The pieces clack softly against the tabletop. And here is something worth noticing. Even where gambling was frowned upon, games themselves were not always condemned. The boundary between game and gambling could be thin. If no money changed hands, it might be tolerated. If a token prize appeared, it could become suspect. People learned to disguise their habits. A wager might become a gift. A loss might become a contribution. Language softened the act. Because medieval life was full of rules, and people were skilled at moving gently around them. The travelers play only for small stakes, perhaps a crust of bread, perhaps the privilege of the best spot near the hearth. It is calm, not cruel, and the night moves on. The lanterns dim, the games end. Coins return to pockets, hands return to sleeves, cloaks are drawn close. And in all these places, the tavern, the square, the manor, the hospice, something stays the same, the quiet human desire to test luck. Not violently, not desperately, just as a way to feel awake inside a world that often feels heavy with routine. Now the story begins to soften, to slow its pace just slightly. The apprentices return to their workshop. The door closes with a wooden thud. Someone pokes the coals, then lets them settle. The room grows quieter as heat fades. A blanket is pulled over shoulders. The manor's candles are snuffed, one by one, leaving thin threads of smoke that curl toward the rafters. The hospice settles into stillness, the last murmured prayers fading into the dark. And you, listening, do not have to hold anything tightly. There is nothing you must decide. No wager you must make. You can simply drift from place to place, following the soft sounds. Coins, cards, dice, the quiet crackle of embers, until the night feels wide and gentle again. Because nothing urgent is waiting. Nothing is chasing anyone. The medieval world continues its slow breathing, warmth and draft, light and soot, comfort and compromise. And somewhere very far away, in another town, another hand reaches for a small leather cup. Not to rush, not to fight, only to roll the dice and listen to the soft answer they give in the dark. The night stretches further, and the air grows colder. In another part of Europe, far from the Italian town and the Venetian canals, we find ourselves in a stone barracks near the edge of a frontier kingdom. The walls are thick, practical, unadorned. A single hearth burns low, its heat uneven, leaving one half of the room warmer than the other. A row of shields leans against the wall. Helmets rest upside down on a bench, catching stray embers of light. The men inside have removed their heavier armor, but they still wear padded garments beneath wool cloaks. Even indoors, the chill lingers. Outside, wind presses against wooden shutters. Inside, someone laughs softly. A soldier kneels beside a crate turned upside down to serve as a table. In his hand is a small pair of dice, worn smooth, corners rounded from years of use. They may have belonged to him for a decade, or they may have passed through 20 hands before reaching his. Soldiers gambled often, not because they were reckless, but because war is uncertainty made visible. When your daily life depends on weather, command decisions, supply wagons, and the strength of walls, chance is no longer abstract. It is present in every breath. And perhaps that is why soldiers were so drawn to small, controlled risks. The roll of dice on wood instead of the unpredictable swing of battle. The dice fall. A 5 and a 2. A groan. Another man tosses in a coin. Thin silver, stamped with a king's profile now slightly rubbed flat. There is no shouting, just the soft rhythm of chance. One soldier warms his hands near the hearth before taking his turn. His fingers are stiff. Too much warmth and the skin cracks from dryness. Too little and you cannot feel the dice properly. This is one of those small, quiet, medieval compromises again. Warmth enough to survive, but not enough to be comfortable. The barrack smells of wool, leather, iron, and faintly of boiled cabbage from supper. The men sit close together for heat. If someone loses heavily, he may not speak for a while. Not from anger but calculation, because even a few lost coins might mean thinner meals later. And yet they continue. Here is a gentle truth woven into the fabric of history. Gambling was often forbidden to soldiers by law or military rule. Commanders feared distraction. They feared disputes. They feared that men who lost too much might desert or fight among themselves. And yet, bans were rarely absolute. Dice were too small to control. Coins too easy to pass discreetly. The practice persisted, because in a life of discipline and command, gambling offered a rare moment of personal agency. A soldier could not choose the next campaign, but he could choose to roll or not. A log shifts in the hearth. Sparks float upward. And now, let us leave the barracks and move toward water. Far to the north, in a harbor town along the Baltic Sea, ships rock gently against their moorings. The smell here is salt and tar, fish and damp rope. Lanterns sway on hooks, their light reflecting in slow ripples. Inside a dockside tavern, sailors gather. Their boots leave wet marks on wooden planks. The floor creaks with every step. A cat moves silently between barrels. Here, gambling feels slightly different, less controlled, more fluid. A sailor empties a small pouch onto the table. Shells, foreign coins, a ring perhaps won in a previous game. Trade routes bring more than goods. They bring rules from other lands. A game learned in Constantinople might appear in Lübeck months later. A card pattern seen in Valencia might surface in Bruges. The medieval world was more connected than we sometimes imagine. Slowly connected, but steadily. And in that connection, gambling evolved. Cards replaced dice in some circles because they offered memory, strategy. Suspense stretched across several rounds instead of resolved in a single throw. But dice never disappeared, because dice are elemental. You do not need literacy. You do not need elaborate equipment. You need only a surface and a moment. The sailors begin a game. The stakes are not enormous. Perhaps a portion of their next shore meal. Perhaps a promise of labor exchanged. Sometimes gambling was not only about coin. It was about obligation. A day helping mend nets. A turn carrying heavier cargo. Favor owed. Not all wagers were silver. Sometimes they were time. And time, in the Middle Ages, felt long and slow and precious. The tavern keeper glances toward the door now and then. Not nervously but watchfully. Harbor towns were known for gambling disputes. Sailors might win large sums after long voyages and lose them just as quickly. Authorities in many port cities tried to regulate gaming houses for this very reason. Not purely from morality, but from practicality. A man who lost all his pay might cause trouble, and unrest was bad for trade. So some towns designated specific days, specific houses, specific limits. In Venice, in Florence, in parts of Germany, early public gambling houses were established under supervision. Again, not because leaders loved gambling, but because they knew prohibition failed. Containment worked better. This pattern repeats through history like a quiet refrain. Now we move inland once more, to a winter fair in France. It is daytime now, pale and silver, the sun low and distant. Frost clings to tent ropes. Smoke rises from braziers set up near stalls selling hot wine and roasted chestnuts. Fairs were some of the most important social and economic gatherings of medieval Europe. Merchants traveled weeks to attend them. Contracts were signed. Marriages arranged. News exchanged. And gambling flourished. Temporary tables appeared beneath striped awnings. Traveling gamblers followed the fair circuit just as spice traders and cloth sellers did. The air here smells of cinnamon, damp wool, and cold earth. Children weave between adults. A bell rings from a nearby chapel. At one table, a wheel stands upright, divided into painted sections. A crude precursor to later roulette-style devices. The wheel spins slowly, creaking. A small wooden peg clicks against nails as it turns. Tick, tick, tick. There is something mesmerizing about it. People gather not because they believe they will win, but because the movement itself holds the eye. Modern casinos use light and sound to hold attention. Medieval gambling used rhythm. Spin, click, stop. A woman places a small wager, 2 coins wrapped in cloth. She watches the wheel with steady eyes. Not desperate, not trembling, just curious. The wheel slows, stops. She wins. A small smile, nothing extravagant, but the feeling lingers, because in a life defined by repetition, baking bread, washing wool, tending animals, this small break in pattern feels vivid. And here is another subtle contrast to modern life. Today, change is constant. Back then, routine was constant. So a single unexpected turn felt brighter. As afternoon fades, the fair begins to quiet. Merchants count earnings. Children grow tired. The gambling tables fold up one by one. But before they do, a small dispute arises. 2 men argue quietly over a result. Not shouting, just insistence. One claims the peg skipped. The other claims it did not. A small crowd leans closer. And this is where medieval gambling shows another face. Community enforcement. Without formal oversight, fairness depended on reputation. If a gambler gained a reputation for cheating, word traveled quickly, along trade routes, through taverns, across parishes. Trust was currency. Lose it and your livelihood vanished. The dispute resolves softly. Compromise. Half the wager returned. A handshake, though cautious. The wheel folds. The day ends. Now we slow again. The fairground empties. Frost thickens along the grass. The last embers of braziers dim to red. Across Europe, in taverns, barracks, manor halls, dockside inns, fair tents, the pattern repeats. Chance meets routine. Coin meets hand. Hope meets caution. And through it all, life continues its steady pulse. The baker still rises before dawn. The soldier still sharpens his blade. The sailor still mends rope. The noble still attends court. Gambling does not replace life. Fits inside it, like a small ember in a wide hearth. Not enough to light the world, just enough to glow. And as the night returns again, soft, gradual, you can imagine all these places settling. Dice wrapped in cloth and tucked into pockets. Cards stacked and tied with ribbon. Coins counted and slipped into leather pouches. Nothing urgent remains. No great fortune won. No catastrophe unfolding. Only the quiet memory of risk balanced carefully against survival. The wind moves gently across rooftops. Lanterns are extinguished. The world breathes in and out. And somewhere, far from noise and spectacle, a single die rests on a wooden table, waiting patiently for the next hand to lift it. The night deepens. There is time. There is no hurry. The night softens again, and this time it carries us to a quieter place. Not a tavern, not a fairground, but a monastery on the edge of a small river valley, sometime in the 14th century. The stone walls here are pale in moonlight. Frost settles lightly along the cloister garden where bare branches of fruit trees reach upward like careful hands. Inside, the corridors are still. Sandaled footsteps echo faintly and then disappear. Monasteries were places of discipline and prayer. Bells marked the hours. Meals were simple. Silence often was observed. And yet, even here, where life was structured by devotion, the human inclination toward chance sometimes appeared. Not always openly, not always approved, but present. In a small scriptorium warmed by a modest brazier, two younger monks sit at a wooden desk. The room smells of parchment and ink, iron gall, sharp and metallic. A single candle flickers beside a manuscript half illuminated in red and blue pigment. One monk closes the heavy book gently. The other reaches into the sleeve of his robe. From within, he produces something small. Knuckle bones. Simple sheep ankle bones, polished from use. This was one of the oldest forms of gaming, long before playing cards arrived in Europe. The bones were tossed and caught in patterns, sometimes used for wagers, sometimes merely for skill. Here they play quietly. No coin is placed on the table. Only dried figs from supper. A small indulgence. And here is a subtle truth worth resting with. Not all medieval gambling was about wealth. Often it was about diversion. Long winters. Long hours of copying text. Long stretches of silence. Today, if one grows restless, one can reach for music, for books, for glowing screens filled with endless stories. Back then, stillness could feel heavy. So even in holy places, small games appeared like sparks. The bones click lightly on wood. One monk wins. He smiles faintly, almost apologetically. The other sighs, not frustrated, just thoughtful. They stop before the candle burns too low. Because wax is precious. Light always must be rationed. The brazier gives off more smoke than warmth. One monk coughs softly and adjusts the iron grate. Warmth, left-right arrow smoke. Comfort, left-right arrow irritation. Even here, and though formal church doctrine often condemned gambling, especially when it led to greed or quarrels, there were always gray spaces. Some abbots forbade dice entirely. Others tolerated quiet games without money. And sometimes manuscripts themselves bore small illustrations of gamblers, warnings perhaps, or simply reflections of life beyond monastery walls. We leave the cloister gently and move south again, to Spain, late 15th century, a city courtyard in Seville, where orange trees grow within enclosed patios. The air smells faintly of citrus and dust. Moorish architectural arches cast patterned shadows across stone floors. Here, gambling takes a slightly different form, because this is a crossroads of cultures. Christian kingdoms, Islamic traditions, Jewish merchants, all have left their marks on Iberia's gaming customs. Playing cards are now more common. Printed decks circulate widely. Designs differ from region to region. Cups, swords, coins, batons. The imagery echoes older traditions carried westward through centuries of trade. In this courtyard, a group of men sit on woven mats. A low table stands between them. A jug of watered wine rests nearby. The game is deliberate. There is calculation. There is memory. Unlike dice, which resolve in a single instant, cards stretch tension across time. A player may hold a winning hand quietly, waiting. Another may bluff, hoping the others doubt their strength. Bluffing existed long before modern poker. Though the terminology differed, the instinct to conceal and reveal strategically is ancient. And here lies a gentle hook of curiosity. As playing cards spread across Europe, authorities worried not only about gambling losses, but about idleness. Time spent gaming was time not spent working. In agrarian societies, time meant harvests, measured seasons, survival. So laws were written limiting gaming to certain days, often festivals or evenings after work. But enforcement was uneven, because in many communities, gaming became woven into festivals themselves. At harvest celebrations, at wedding feasts, at carnival. And so we see something steady across centuries. Prohibition softens into regulation. Condemnation bends into containment. Now, let us step into one of those festivals. It is Carnival in Venice, early 17th century. Masks fill the streets. Silks shimmer in torchlight. Music drifts over canals. The air smells of wax, wine, and perfume. This is where the first regulated gambling house, the Ridotto, operates openly. Inside, chandeliers hang like frozen constellations. The light reflects off polished floors. Servants move with quiet efficiency. Players wear masks not for secrecy alone, but because Carnival suspends hierarchy. For a few days, status blurs. A merchant might sit beside a noble. A foreign visitor might gamble beside a Venetian senator. The game of Beccetta unfolds at a long table. Cards are dealt with careful hands. Coins are stacked in small, gleaming piles. The room hums, not loudly, but steadily. Conversations remain low. Decorum matters. And here appears the micro-conflict again. Luxury, left-right arrow risk. The warmth of candlelight, left-right arrow, the ever-present danger of flame against silk draperies. Rich fabrics trap heat. Air grows heavy. Windows remain shuttered against the cold night outside. Comfort suffocates slightly, but no one complains, because the atmosphere itself is part of the experience. A woman in a half-mask places a wager. A nobleman folds. A servant refills a glass. And somewhere within the room, someone loses more than intended. Not dramatically, no shouting, just a slight tightening of jaw. because gambling at this level carries consequences beyond coin. Reputation, marriage prospects, political leverage. In societies structured rigidly by rank, sudden financial shifts ripple outward. And so, the Ridotto becomes not merely a place of games but a controlled release valve for risk. Better here under supervision than in dark alleys. Better within walls, taxed and recorded, than spilling unrest into streets. Outside, gondolas drift quietly beneath bridges. Inside, cards slide across polished wood. And then, as carnival fades, the Ridotto closes again. Because even sanctioned gambling in Venice is seasonal. Contained. Measured. Now we slow. The music dims. Masks are removed. Candles are extinguished one by one. And across Europe, the story continues not in spectacle, but in ordinary rooms. In a peasant cottage, a husband and wife toss a single coin to decide who will rise first to check the animals in the cold dawn. In a merchant's house, two brothers play a quiet card game after supper, wagering nothing more than pride. In a roadside inn, a traveler tests his luck one last time before continuing his journey. Gambling in the Middle Ages was rarely constant frenzy. It was woven into the texture of life. Small, occasional, human, and always accompanied by the same delicate balance. Hope left-right arrow caution. Warmth left-right arrow draft. Light left-right arrow soot. Possibility left-right arrow loss. Now the evening settles once more. The monastery sleeps. The courtyard in Seville grows silent. Venice's canals lie dark and still. Dice rest in pouches. Cards lie stacked and tied. Coins sit in wooden chests, counted and recounted. Nothing urgent remains. No flashing lights. No clamor. Only the steady breath of history moving quietly forward. And as you listen, you do not need to wager anything. You do not need to win. You can simply drift through these rooms of stone and wood, through candlelit halls and smoky taverns, feeling the rhythm of chance woven gently into ordinary days. The world is calm. The night is patient. And the next small roll of the dice will come in its own time. Morning arrives slowly over a long, winding pilgrim road somewhere in Central Europe. Mist lies low over the fields. Dew clings to the edges of coarse wool cloaks hung overnight on fence posts. A bell tolls faintly from a distant chapel, its sound softened by fog. Travelers rise stiffly from straw pallets inside a roadside inn. They rub their hands together, breathe into their fingers, and step outside where the air is sharp and honest. Pilgrimage routes were arteries of medieval Europe. They carried faith, stories, trade, and games. Along the roads to Santiago, Rome, Canterbury, Jerusalem, small economies formed wherever travelers gathered. And wherever people gathered, so did chance. Near a wooden market cross at a crossroads village, a few pilgrims sit on overturned barrels. Their boots are dusty, their hats wide-brimmed against the sun. A simple cloth has been laid atop a crate, and on it rests a pair of dice and a few copper coins. Not much, but enough. One man shakes the dice in his cupped hands. His palms are calloused. He has walked for weeks. His sandals are patched. He laughs softly, not from mockery, but from the quiet thrill of the unknown. He throws. The dice tumble. A 5 and a 6. A small exhale from the group. The coins move. And then someone remarks, almost idly, "It is God who decides." This was not unusual. In medieval thought, chance was rarely seen as random in the modern sense. Many believed that outcomes reflected divine will, fate, or moral balance. To roll dice was not always to challenge God, but to witness a fragment of his design. It was a complicated relationship. Some theologians condemned gambling as tempting providence. Others acknowledged that casting lots had biblical precedent. After all, Soldiers at the crucifixion cast lots for Christ's garments. The apostles cast lots to replace Judas. Chance had scriptural roots. And so, on dusty roads and market squares, people rolled dice without feeling they were stepping outside their faith. Now the morning grows brighter. A market begins to assemble around the crossroads. Farmers arrive with carts of cabbages and onions. A woman sets up a small table selling honeycomb wrapped in waxed cloth. A boy carries a bundle of firewood on his back. And beside the market cross, another kind of gambling appears, more subtle. A man with a weathered face unrolls a parchment and places it on the table. The parchment bears symbols. Planets, signs of the zodiac, curious diagrams of circles within circles. He is not a gambler in the tavern sense. He is an astrologer. And astrology in the Middle Ages was not fringe. It was woven into medicine, agriculture, and royal decision-making. Kings consulted astrologers before campaigns. Physicians noted planetary positions before prescribing treatments. To modern ears, it may sound distant. But to medieval minds, the heavens were a system, ordered, readable, meaningful. The astrologer does not roll dice. He casts small stones onto the parchment, reading where they fall. A woman leans closer. She asks about her son who travels far. The astrologer studies the placement. He speaks gently, cautiously. And though no coin visibly changes hands in a flashy way, a small payment is made. Here we see another face of gambling, not purely material but existential. People wagered not only money, but reassurance. In a world where letters took weeks and disease could strike without warning, a promise of favorable alignment felt valuable. Comfort, left-right arrow, uncertainty. Knowledge, left-right arrow, mystery. And this balance echoes the dice at the pilgrim's crate. Now, as the market fills, the atmosphere warms. Bread ovens crackle nearby. The smell of yeast and ash drifts through the air. A musician begins to tune a small stringed instrument. Children run between stalls. And at another table, 3 young men play a card game recently learned from travelers. The deck is slightly mismatched. Some cards replaced, some edges worn. They deal slowly. Unlike the quick toss of dice, this game unfolds across several rounds. Each card revealed is a small shift. Cup beats a sword. A coin beats a baton. Patterns emerge. And here is a gentle contrast to modern gaming. Today, odds are calculated by machines in invisible algorithms. Back then, probability was felt, not computed. Players developed instincts through repetition. They counted what had appeared. They remembered which suits were missing. It was mathematics without formal notation. Quiet mental arithmetic beneath wool hats. A young man hesitates before placing his final coin. He has won twice already. The temptation to press luck is strong. This is a timeless moment. He glances at his friend. He glances at the card in his hand. And he places the coin. The card turns. He loses. No outburst. Just a quiet nod. Because in medieval communities, reputation mattered more than any single coin. To react violently would stain a name. And names traveled fast, especially along pilgrim roads. By midday, the market hums steadily. A friar passes, observing but not interfering. Laws against gambling exist, yes, but enforcement is selective. Minor wagers at markets are tolerated as long as they do not erupt into chaos. Authorities worried less about coins changing hands than about disorder. And so, as long as voices remain calm, as long as disputes resolve softly, the games continue. Now we travel again. To England, late 14th century. A village green beside a timber-framed church. The afternoon sun is pale but steady. Sheep graze beyond a low fence. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys. It is after harvest. A small celebration. Barrels of ale stand near a long wooden table. Bread loaves are cut into thick slices. Children chase one another across the grass. And at the edge of the gathering, beneath a tree, sits a group of older men. They play tables, a game resembling modern backgammon. The board is carved wood. The pieces are simple discs. Dice determine movement. Tables was popular across medieval Europe. It required both luck and strategy. A bad roll could hinder you. A clever move could rescue you. Again, the blend. Chance left-right arrow skill. One man rolls poorly. Another maneuvers carefully. A third watches, offering quiet advice. Coins rest beside the board, not large sums, but symbolic enough to give the game weight. And here we see something important. Gambling in the Middle Ages was often communal. Spectators gathered. Advice was shared. Outcomes discussed. It was not isolated. It was woven into conversation. The village reeve passes by. He nods. He does not object. Because this is harvest time. Work is done. The fields are cut. And small pleasures are permitted. As the sun dips lower, shadows stretch across the green. The air cools. Ale mugs empty. The table's board closes with a wooden click. Coins are pocketed. And slowly, villagers return to cottages where fires must be lit again. Inside one such cottage, a family gathers near the hearth. The room smells of peat smoke and stewed onions. A small candle burns on the table. The father pulls out a single die, not to gamble for money, but to tell stories. He rolls and each number corresponds to a tale. A dragon, a saint, a foolish knight, a clever fox. Here, chance becomes narrative. The die determines which story is told, and children listen wide-eyed. In this way, gambling tools sometimes served gentler purposes. They structured play. They added surprise to storytelling. And in long winters, surprise was precious. Now night falls again. The pilgrim road grows quiet. The market cross stands empty. The village green fades into shadow. Dice return to pouches. Cards are wrapped in cloth. Astrological charts are rolled carefully and tied with string. Nothing urgent remains. No grand fortunes won or lost. Only the soft memory of risk balanced against routine. The medieval world continues breathing slow, steady, grounded in stone and soil. Chance does not dominate it. It flickers within it, like a candle in a window. And as you rest with these images, the pilgrim's crate, the astrologer's parchment, the harvest board game, you can feel how gambling was never separate from life. It was an echo of it, an attempt to read uncertainty, a small negotiation with fate. The night is cool, the air is still, and somewhere, in another village, another die rolls softly across wood, not in defiance, not in desperation, just in quiet curiosity about what might come next. Evening settles over a growing medieval city, larger now than the villages and crossroads we have wandered through. Stone towers rise above tiled roofs. Narrow streets twist between tall timber-framed houses whose upper floors lean slightly toward one another, as though whispering across the lane. The air smells of smoke, horse, and something faintly metallic from a nearby smithy closing for the night. Inside the city hall, candles burn low over a heavy oak table. A group of officials sits in wool cloaks trimmed modestly with fur. Scrolls lie open. Ink dries slowly in the cool air. They are not gamblers, but they are discussing gambling. Because in cities, games have begun to grow louder, more frequent, and sometimes more disruptive. Markets bring crowds. Crowds bring wagers. Wagers sometimes bring quarrels. And quarrels threaten order. One councilman speaks of recent disputes in taverns. Voices raised, fists thrown, a broken bench. Another mentions apprentices losing wages meant for their masters. A third notes complaints from wives whose husbands returned home with empty purses. The candlelight flickers, wax drips, and here we see another subtle truth. Urban life amplified everything. In villages, reputation controlled behavior. Everyone knew everyone. In cities, anonymity grew. A traveler could gamble heavily and leave town the next day. A dishonest dealer could move to another district and begin again. So city councils began writing ordinances, not always to ban gambling outright, but to confine it. They might declare that dice games were forbidden during working hours, or that no one under a certain age could wager coin, or that gaming must occur only in licensed houses. These laws were often read aloud in marketplaces, nailed to wooden posts, recorded in thick ledgers. Enforcement varied, but the intent was clear: control, not eradication. And so, as night deepens, we move from the council chamber to a different kind of room. A private chamber above a wine shop. The stair creaks as patrons climb. The door at the top is thick and reinforced. Inside, a table stands beneath several candles arranged carefully to avoid dripping wax onto felt cloth. This is not a public tavern game. This is organized. Coins sit in neat stacks. A ledger rests beside the dealer. The dealer himself is calm, deliberate, dressed in clean linen and dark wool. He is trusted, at least for now. Here, the game is baribi, a lottery-style game that would later become popular in Italy and France. A board bears numbered squares. Players place tokens on chosen numbers. A bag holds matching numbered slips. The dealer draws one. The suspense is slower than dice, longer than cards. Players lean forward slightly, but remain composed. And here is something quietly fascinating. Lotteries emerged in medieval Europe not only as gambling amusements, but as public financing tools. Cities sometimes organized official lotteries to raise money for walls, bridges, churches. Participants purchased tickets. Prizes were awarded. The city gained funds. Chance became civic. It was not yet the grand national lotteries of later centuries, but the roots are visible. And in this upstairs chamber, the private and public worlds of gambling blur. A few players may hope for sudden gain. The house ensures steady profit. The city watches from afar. The drawn number is revealed. A woman in a dark veil wins modestly. She inclines her head. No outburst, just a soft acknowledgement of fortune. Outside, snow begins to fall. Soft flakes collect on windowsills and cobblestones. The street grows quiet. Footsteps become muffled. Inside, the room grows warmer from gathered bodies and candles. The air thickens slightly. One man loosens his collar. Another coughs softly from smoke. Warmth, left-right arrow suffocation. Light, left-right arrow hazard. Even in regulated gaming rooms, comfort remains imperfect. Now let us leave the city and travel east, to the courts of the Byzantine Empire centuries earlier, where gaming also flourished under different names and rules. In Constantinople, beneath domed ceilings and mosaic walls, courtiers gather around a carved ivory board. The pieces gleam in lamplight. The game resembles tables, ancestor of backgammon. The room smells of oil lamps and incense. Outside, the Bosporus reflects starlight. Here, stakes may not always be coin. They may be favors, influence, political alliances, because gambling at court was rarely isolated from power. A prince who wins consistently might gain reputation for cleverness. A courtier who loses recklessly might be seen as unstable. Games became mirrors, quiet tests of temperament. Did one grow angry? Did one remain steady? Did one calculate carefully? These qualities mattered beyond the board. And so gambling served subtle social purposes, not merely to win, but to observe. Now we move once more to a winter night in a German town during the 15th century. Inside a guild hall, craftsmen gather after a long day. Candles rest in iron sconces along the wall. A tapestry depicting saints hangs near the dais. Guilds regulated trade: shoemakers, blacksmiths, weavers. They also regulated behavior among members. And yes, they sometimes set rules about gambling. Within this hall, a dice game unfolds. But there is a limit. A guild officer watches gently from a nearby bench. No one may wager more than a set amount. No one may gamble on credit, because debt within a guild threatens solidarity. And here we see again, medieval communities understood risk deeply. They lived with it daily, whether illness, war. So when they created gambling spaces, they often tried to shape boundaries. Too much risk destabilized. Measured risk entertained. The dice roll. The men laugh softly. Someone passes around a cup of warm ale spiced faintly with herbs. Outside, snow piles against doorframes. Inside, the hall glows. Time moves slowly. And now we begin to slow again. Across Europe, gambling has taken many forms. Dice in barracks, cards in courtyards, wheels at fairs, lotteries in cities, boards in guild halls, knucklebones in cloisters. It is never one thing, never purely vice, never purely virtue. It is woven into social fabric, sometimes tolerated, sometimes condemned, often reshaped. And as the centuries move toward the early modern era, something subtle begins to shift. Games grow more structured, houses more formal, regulation more intentional. The seeds of the casino, controlled environment, official oversight, elegant setting, are quietly sprouting. But still, in most places, gambling remains intimate. A table, a cup, a coin, a breath held. The snow outside falls thicker now. Windows glow softly across the town. Candles are extinguished one by one. Guildhall doors close. The upstairs lottery room empties. City officials return home, satisfied that laws have been written, even if not perfectly enforced. The Byzantine court dims its lamps. And somewhere, beneath layers of wool and fur, a man slips a pair of dice into a small wooden box before lying down to sleep. He does not know that centuries later, vast halls filled with chandeliers and velvet would grow from these quiet rooms. He knows only the simple rhythm. Shake, roll, pause, count. The night deepens. The snow muffles the world. Nothing urgent remains. Only the soft awareness that chance, like the seasons, will return again. The snow that fell through the night now lies smooth and pale across the countryside. Morning light glints softly on frozen hedgerows. Smoke rises in thin, steady lines from manor chimneys. Hooves crunch against frost as a servant leads horses from a stable to drink at a trough where ice must first be broken. Inside the manor house, the air is warmer than outdoors, but never perfectly so. Thick tapestries hang along stone walls to soften drafts. A large hearth burns in the great hall, though the heat gathers mostly near the flames. Those seated farther away keep cloaks around their shoulders. Breakfast has ended. Bread, cheese, perhaps preserved apples. Servants clear trenchers and wipe the long oak table with damp cloths that stiffen quickly in the chill air. And now, when duties pause before midday business begins, a smaller group remains at the table. 2 nobles, a visiting cousin, and a steward who watches quietly from the edge of the room. They are not playing for trifles. They are playing for sums large enough to matter. The game is Primero, an early card game popular in Renaissance courts, particularly in Spain and Italy, but spreading steadily northward. It rewards both strong hands and strong nerves. There is bluffing, though it may not yet be called that. Coins are not stacked in casual piles. Instead, small leather purses rest beside each player. The steward keeps note on parchment. Because at this level, gambling becomes intertwined with credit. A noble might not carry enough coin to cover a large loss in a single evening. Instead, a debt is recorded. Payment will be made later, from rents collected, from grain sold, from dowries arranged. And here, the tension is softer but deeper. A peasant losing a coin feels hunger more immediately. A noble losing a purse may feel it months later, when accounts are tallied and lands are measured. The cousin draws a card. He hesitates. He increases the wager slightly. The visiting noble narrows his eyes, not suspicious, but calculating. The steward dips his quill into ink. And this is where gambling reveals another face. Status gambling was not merely entertainment. It was performance. To wager boldly signaled confidence. To fold too quickly signaled timidity. To chase losses too aggressively signaled instability. In rigidly hierarchical societies, perception mattered deeply. A noble who appeared reckless could lose political influence. A noble who appeared cautious might gain trust. And so, cards on the table were rarely just cards. They were symbols of composure. Outside the hall windows, snow slides slowly from roof edges. Inside, a log cracks in the hearth. One player loses heavily in a single round. He smiles. He nods. He does not protest. But later, much later, when the hall is quiet and the steward counts grain in the granary, the loss will be felt. Perhaps a servant will be dismissed. Perhaps a horse sale delayed. Perhaps a marriage negotiation altered. This is the quiet ripple of gambling at higher levels. Not loud collapse, but subtle adjustment. Now we move away from the manor and into a university town. It is late afternoon in Bologna or Paris or Oxford, any center of medieval learning. Students in dark robes move between lecture halls. Latin phrases float through cloisters. Parchment rustles. Ink stains fingers. And in a rented chamber above a baker's shop, several students gather around a rough wooden table. Their room smells of flour drifting upward from ovens below. Bread bakes steadily. The warmth seeps into the floorboards. Students were known gamblers, not because they were wealthier, but because youth often carries appetite for risk. Their stakes are small copper coins sent by parents, sometimes barely enough to last the month. The game tonight is dice. Fast. Excited. Laughter bursts more freely here than in manor halls. One student loses 3 throws in a row and groans dramatically, falling back onto a thin mattress stuffed with straw. Another wins and immediately suggests doubling the wager. And here comes the familiar micro-conflict. Excitement left-right arrow prudence. Youth left-right arrow consequence. One quieter student hesitates. He calculates in his head how much bread he can buy with what remains. He declines the higher wager. The others tease him lightly, but he keeps his coin. This moment, too, feels timeless. A choice between immediate thrill and steady survival. Outside, church bells mark the hour. The students eventually stop. Not because the game grows dull, but because evening prayers approach and professors may pass through streets. Even in cities of learning, gambling could bring reprimand. University statutes sometimes ban dice games outright. Not always successfully, because boredom, like chance, is persistent. Now we travel west again, to a rural inn along a forest road in France. Night. Rain taps against shutters. Inside, a single large room holds travelers. A merchant with bolts of cloth, a farmer returning from market, a messenger carrying sealed letters. They share stew from a large pot. The room smells of onions, damp wool, and wood smoke. After supper, someone suggests a game. A simple one. 3 dice. Highest total wins. The stakes? A round of ale for the table. Laughter softens the edges of fatigue. The dice roll. The merchant wins. He orders ale not only for himself but for all. In this way, gambling sometimes redistributed wealth in small communal ways. A generous winner could build goodwill. A stingy winner might find himself unwelcome next time. Because medieval travel relied heavily on reputation and hospitality. The rain outside intensifies. The innkeeper banks the fire carefully. Too large a flame risks sparks against dry beams. Too small and the room chills quickly. Always balance. Always calculation. The game ends before midnight. Travelers wrap cloaks tighter and settle into corners of the common room. Coins are counted quietly. No one leaves ruined. Just slightly lighter or heavier in purse. And now we begin to sense something emerging across all these places. A gradual sophistication. Not in technology, but in structure. Games becoming more organized. Wagers more recorded. Rooms more dedicated. Authorities more involved. The seeds of what will one day become permanent gambling houses are deepening. But still, the experience remains tactile. Coins heavy in hand. Dice warm from palms. Cards slightly bent at edges. No flashing lights. No mechanical sounds. Just breath, wood, flame, and patience. The snow outside the manor melts slightly under midday sun. The university students fall asleep over open books. The rural inn grows silent as rain eases. In every place, games pause. Not because chance disappears, but because life continues. Fields must be tended. Lectures attended. Accounts settled. Letters delivered. Gambling fits into gaps. Into evenings. Into celebrations. Into waiting. And now, as night folds again over towns and countryside alike, there is nothing urgent to resolve. No final hand to reveal. No grand jackpot to chase. Only the steady rhythm of medieval life, punctuated gently by the roll of dice and the shuffle of cards. The hearth glows low. Snow drips from eaves. Ink dries on ledgers. And somewhere, in a small wooden box tucked beneath a bed, a pair of dice rests quietly, waiting for another evening, another table, another careful hand. The winter is loosening its grip now. Snow has thinned to damp patches along stone roads. The air smells less of frost and more of wet earth. In the countryside, farmers begin quietly preparing tools for spring. In cities, shutters are opened a little earlier each morning. And far from the modest inns and guild halls we have visited, we now step into something grander. A royal court in late 15th century Italy. The palace is not a fantasy of glittering marble everywhere, but it is impressive. High ceilings, frescoes along walls, floors tiled in patterned stone, large windows draped in heavy fabric to keep out drafts. Still, even here, warmth is uneven. Braziers burn charcoal in corners of the hall. Servants move them occasionally to prevent smoke from gathering too thickly. The air carries the faint scent of heated metal and incense. The court has finished its formal duties for the day. Petitions have been heard. Letters dictated. Diplomatic matters discussed. And now, in a more private chamber adjoining the great hall, a select group gathers. Not peasants. Not apprentices, but dukes, advisors, visiting envoys. Here, gambling is not spontaneous. It is arranged. A long table stands beneath several carefully positioned candles. The wax is beeswax, cleaner and steadier than tallow. Velvet cloth covers the tabletop. Coins gleam in lamplight, gold florins, silver ducats. This is no longer a casual tavern game. This is spectacle. The game is basetta, fashionable among the elite. It is fast, elegant, and dangerous in the wrong hands. Cards are dealt from a richly decorated deck. The dealer stands at one end, expression unreadable. There is silence when cards move. Only the faint sliding sound of parchment against velvet. And here we begin to glimpse something new. A controlled atmosphere. Lighting arranged to enhance focus. Seating designed for status. A designated dealer separate from players. The seeds of the modern casino are taking shape. Not yet a public hall open to anyone, but a structured gaming environment. A noblewoman in embroidered silk rests her gloved hand lightly on the table. Her wager is placed not in a messy pile but in an orderly stack. Across from her, a visiting ambassador hesitates before raising the bet. This is no longer merely entertainment. It is diplomacy through risk. To wager boldly may signal confidence. To withdraw gracefully may signal restraint. Observers watch closely not only the cards but the player's composure. And this is a subtle but powerful truth. Gambling at court often functioned as theater. The stakes were financial, yes, but they were also symbolic. A king who lost heavily and laughed it off appeared magnanimous. A duke who quarreled over small sums appeared petty. Reputation, once again, is currency. Outside the palace, in narrow streets lit by lanterns, common citizens continue their own games. Dice near a bakery, cards in an inn. The contrast is gentle but clear. Below, warmth scarce, coins few, games quick. Above, warmth curated, coins abundant, games ritualized. Yet both share the same human heartbeat. The same pause before revelation. The same breath held. Now we travel forward slightly in time. Venice again. Early 17th century. The Ridotto stands illuminated during Carnival. But tonight we enter not as dazzled tourists, but slowly, quietly, observing the architecture of early casino life. The building itself is controlled entry. Masks required. Dress codes enforced. Why? Because regulation is part of the design. The Venetian government established the Ridotto in 1638 to confine gambling to one supervised location during Carnival. Not to eliminate it, to manage it. Inside, chandeliers cast steady light. The glow is warm but measured. Servants move with practiced discretion. The noise level remains low. This is not chaos. It is choreography. Games of Baribi and Basetta unfold at separate tables. Each table has its own rhythm. Coins pass through official hands. Losses and winnings are noted. There is security here, not armed guards in armor, but social enforcement. Cheating is punished. Disorder is removed. And for the first time in our journey, gambling becomes a semi-permanent institution. A place you go to gamble, not merely a table you happen upon. This shift matters. In taverns, games were temporary. In courts, games were private. Here, they are centralized. And yet, even in this refined setting, micro-conflicts persist. The room grows warm from gathered bodies and layered costumes. Perfume mixes with wax and human breath. A masked gentleman wipes his brow discreetly. A woman adjusts her lace sleeve, careful not to brush the flame of a candle. Comfort left-right arrow excess. Luxury left-right arrow fragility. Outside, the canal water laps quietly against stone. Inside, fortunes change hands. A young nobleman loses more than he intended. His masked expression does not change. But beneath the velvet and silk, his pulse quickens. He must decide whether to continue. The temptation to recover losses is ancient. It is not a modern invention. Even then, players knew the pull of chasing fortune. He pauses. He withdraws. A wise choice, perhaps, or a regret he will ponder later. Now we step away from Venice and return to quieter spaces. Because while grand halls begin to shape the future of casinos, most gambling still lives in modest rooms. In Prague, a merchant counts his weekly earnings before setting aside a small portion for an evening game. In Lisbon, sailors docked after a long voyage gather in a lanternlit tavern, wagering small silver coins from distant ports. In a Polish village, farmers toss dice to decide who will host the next communal feast. The forms vary. The rhythm remains. Chance woven into routine. Risk measured against necessity. And now, as twilight descends once more over Europe, we begin to slow. The royal chamber empties. Velvet cloth is folded. Coins are returned to locked chests. The redado's candles are extinguished in careful sequence. Servants sweep floors. Masks are stored in boxes lined with linen. Tavern tables are wiped clean. Dice tucked into pouches. The wind moves softly along canals and rooftops. In centuries to come, gambling houses will grow larger, brighter, louder. They will cross oceans, evolve into glittering halls of mirrors and light. But here, in these early rooms, we see the foundation: structured space, regulated play, measured spectacle, and beneath it all, the same simple human gesture. A hand extending, a coin placed, card turned. Now nothing urgent remains. No hand left unresolved. No will still spinning. Only the quiet breath of night settling over stone cities and wooden villages alike. The fire dims. The air cools. And somewhere in the darkness, beneath silk gloves or rough wool sleeves, fingers still remember the feeling of chance resting in the palm. Spring has fully arrived now. The air carries warmth that lingers even after sunset. Market squares stay busy longer. Windows open slightly to let out smoke and let in breeze. Along the Mediterranean coast, ships return more frequently, their sails bright against the blue. We find ourselves in Genoa, a merchant republic. Here, gambling takes on yet another shape, subtle, intertwined with trade and mathematics. In a counting house near the harbor, ledgers lie open across a broad desk. Ink dries slowly on thick parchment pages. The room smells of salt air drifting in from open shutters, mixed with beeswax and oiled wood. Merchants gather not for dice tonight, but for speculation. It does not look like gambling at first glance. There are no cups, no cards, only discussion. Cargo ship is due in 3 weeks. Its hull carries spices from the Levant, perhaps silk, perhaps precious dyes. The sea is calm now, but storms are unpredictable. A group of investors sit around the table. Each places coin into a pooled fund to support the voyage. If the ship returns safely, profits will be shared. If it sinks, the loss will be divided. This is not called gambling. It is called partnership. But at its heart lies the same negotiation with uncertainty. Here is one of those gentle historical truths. Medieval Europe saw the rise of maritime insurance and investment contracts that resembled controlled wagers. Merchants calculated risks of storms, piracy, spoilage. They distributed that risk among many contributors. Chance became financial science. The men at the table speak softly. One calculates projected profit. Another mentions recent reports of corsairs. A third nods thoughtfully. No dice roll. Yet the uncertainty feels just as tangible. Comfort left-right arrow risk. Investment left-right arrow loss. In this environment, gambling and commerce begin to overlap. Mathematical thinking grows sharper. Probability, though not yet formalized in modern terms, becomes intuitive among traders. And in quieter hours, after contracts are signed and ledgers closed, some of these same merchants gather in private rooms to play cards. Games informed now by their sharpened sense of odds. They count cards more carefully. They measure risk more precisely. The seeds of probability theory, though still centuries from formal articulation, are quietly forming in minds trained by trade and gaming alike. Now let us move north again, to Paris in the early 17th century. The city hums with carriage wheels and church bells. Noble households host salons in candlelit chambers where philosophers and poets debate. In one such salon, beneath painted ceilings, a group gathers not only to gamble, but to discuss gambling. A gentleman named Chevalier de Mere complains about a dice problem that has puzzled him. He cannot understand why certain wagers succeed more often than others. He seeks advice from mathematicians. And from these conversations, these calm exchanges in lamplit rooms, probability theory will slowly emerge. Not from casinos, not from battlefields, but from questions about dice. This is a quiet turning point. Gambling, once purely instinctive, begins to invite formal reasoning. Chance becomes subject to calculation, and this shift will ripple forward through centuries. But for now, the salon remains intimate. Cards shuffle softly. Dice clack against polished wood. Voices murmur thoughtfully. A mathematician sketches figures in charcoal. The atmosphere is warm but slightly stale from candle smoke. A window cracks open to let in cool air. Always that balance. Now we step away from cities once more and into a small countryside estate in Scotland. Late evening. Rain patters lightly against thatched roofing. Inside, a laird and his family sit near a peat fire. The room smells of smoke and damp wool. They play a simple dice game to pass time before bed. No ledger, no velvet, just wood and stone. The laird's daughter wins 2 rounds and laughs softly, surprised. Her father pretends sternness but slides a small silver coin toward her. In this moment, gambling is playful, contained, domestic, and it reminds us that while grand halls and financial innovations evolve, the heart of gambling remains simple, a shared moment of uncertainty, a spark in the routine. Now, let us move briefly to China centuries earlier, because while our journey has focused on Europe, gambling traditions in Asia influenced global history deeply. In ancient China, lottery-like games were used as early as the Han Dynasty. Some traditions even claim that lottery funds helped finance sections of the Great Wall, though historians debate the scale of that contribution. Paper money, invented in China long before Europe adopted it, made wagering lighter, more fluid. Printing technology also allowed widespread production of playing cards earlier than in Europe. Trade routes, the Silk Road, maritime connections, carried these innovations westward slowly, over generations. The medieval world was not isolated. It breathed across continents. And so, as Europe's early casinos form in Venice, they stand upon centuries of global exchange. Now we return to Europe for our final movements of this section. It is evening again. In a modest Dutch home, a family gathers around a low table. The Netherlands, rising as a commercial power, sees gambling woven into tavern life and civic lotteries alike. A state lottery ticket lies folded on the table. The family has purchased a share. They will not know the result tonight. The drawing will occur in the city days later. But already the anticipation warms the room slightly. Not greed, just hope. A small possibility. The mother stirs a pot of stew. The father repairs a fishing net. Children whisper about what they might buy if the number is called. Even when gambling is distant, it shapes imagination. And imagination is powerful. Now night deepens again across our scattered scenes. Genoa's counting houses close their shutters. Parisian salons dim their candles. Scottish peat fires burn low. Dutch lottery tickets rest in drawers. Venice's canals lie dark. The Ridotto sleeps until Carnival returns. Across centuries, gambling has transformed. From dice in taverns to regulated halls. From instinct to mathematics. From spontaneous wagers to structured institutions. And yet, At its core, nothing has changed. A human hand still reaches toward uncertainty. A breath still pauses before revelation. A coin still glints in lamplight. Now the world grows quiet. Ships rock gently in harbor. Ledgers are closed. Cards stacked. Dice wrapped in cloth. There is no urgency left in the room. No last wager to make. Only the steady pulse of history carrying us forward toward ever brighter halls and ever more elaborate games. But here, in this softer moment before that future arrives, everything is still. The fire dims. The air cools. And somewhere unseen, a small wooden box closes with a gentle click, holding within it the simple tools of chance, waiting patiently for another evening, another table, another careful hand. The evening arrives gently over an 18th century European city. Gas lamps are not yet common, so the streets glow with oil lanterns set in iron brackets. Carriages roll slowly over cobblestones still damp from afternoon rain. The air carries the faint scent of horse, bread ovens cooling, and river water moving steadily beyond the quay. In a narrow but respectable quarter stands a building unlike the taverns of earlier centuries. It is not grand like a palace, but it is deliberate. A discreet plaque marks the entrance. The door is solid oak, polished from many hands. 2 lanterns burn steadily on either side, trimmed carefully to avoid excess smoke. This is a dedicated gambling house. Not carnival only. Not improvised. Permanent. Inside, the air is warm and layered with smells. Wax, wool cloaks, faint tobacco, polished wood. The lighting is intentional. Candles placed in sconces reflect off mirrors positioned along the walls to amplify brightness without doubling flame. Tables are arranged with purpose. Each has a green cloth surface. Chairs are evenly spaced. A small tray for coins rests near the dealer's side. The dealer. This is something new in the long arc of our story. He is not merely a participant. He is a professional. He stands upright, posture calm, sleeves neatly fastened. His expression is neutral, not cold, not warm. His task is consistency. Games now include faro, roulette-like wheels, hazard, a dice game with complex rules tracing back centuries. The wheel spins with a soft wooden hum. Click, click, click. The ball bounces gently against carved divisions. Unlike earlier village wheels, this one is carefully balanced. The house ensures fairness not purely out of virtue, but because reputation determines survival. In cities where multiple gambling houses now exist, competition demands trust. A gentleman places a stack of coins. A lady, gloved and composed, selects a numbered square. A clerk records larger wagers discreetly in a ledger. The atmosphere is controlled, not loud, not frantic. There are no shouted advertisements, only murmured anticipation. Here we witness something subtle but significant. Gambling has shifted from being woven casually into other activities to becoming the activity itself. People come here for this purpose. They prepare for it. They dress for it. And yet, beneath the polished surface, the same ancient dynamics remain. Hope, left-right arrow restraint. Loss, left-right arrow composure. The wheel slows, stops. A small victory, a small defeat. No one collapses. No one erupts. The house functions because emotion is contained. Now step outside again. Across the city, in a modest home above a tailor's shop, a family sits around a small table. They cannot afford the gambling house, but they have purchased a ticket in the state lottery. Lotteries have grown increasingly common across Europe now. Governments use them to fund bridges, hospitals, even wars. Official drawings occur in public squares under supervision. Tickets are numbered carefully. The family does not know the result yet, but anticipation sits with them at supper. The father turns the ticket in his hands, tracing the inked digits. The mother folds laundry. A child imagines new shoes, perhaps a better stove. Lotteries democratize hope. A peasant and a noble can both hold numbered paper. Though the sums differ, the fire in the hearth burns low. Wood is rationed carefully. Too much fuel spent tonight means less warmth tomorrow. Always calculation. Always balance. Back at the gambling house, the night deepens. Candles burn shorter. Air grows thicker. A gentleman who has lost several rounds pauses, staring at his remaining coins. Here, we encounter the timeless tension of chasing. He believes the next spin must favor him. But the dealer remains steady. The wheel does not remember. This is a quiet truth that would later become formalized in probability theory, but already players sense its mystery. Past losses do not guarantee future wins. Yet the human mind leans toward patterns. He decides to step back. A wise withdrawal. Not dramatic, just measured. Nearby, another player leaves quietly after a modest win, not pressing further. The art of leaving becomes as important as the art of playing. In this room, fortunes do not only change, they circulate. The house retains a portion always. This is the defining evolution. Earlier, gambling was peer-to-peer. Now the house stands between. A structured advantage. A predictable edge. It is subtle but foundational. And this model will travel. From Venice to Paris. From Paris to London. From London eventually across oceans. But tonight we remain here. The dealer calls the final round. Coins are counted. Chairs scrape softly against wooden floors. Cloaks are gathered. Outside, night air feels cool and clean after the warm interior. The gambling house closes its shutters carefully. Candles are extinguished one by one. The wheel rests motionless. Elsewhere in the city, tavern dice still roll. Cards shuffle in private parlors. A sailor flips a coin beneath a lantern on the docks. In the countryside, farmers toss knucklebones after supper. Despite the rise of formal gambling houses, older traditions do not disappear. They coexist. Chance remains everywhere, structured and unstructured, public and private. Now we begin to slow again. The city quiets. Carriages grow fewer. Windows darken. Ledgers close. Tickets are tucked into drawers. Dice placed in pouches. Cards wrapped in cloth. And in the silence that follows, something becomes clear. Across centuries, gambling has shifted in form but not in essence. From bone dice in taverns, to cards in courts, to wheels in regulated halls, to numbered tickets funding bridges and palaces, it has always been about the same delicate human gesture, extending a hand toward uncertainty. Not always greed, not always desperation, often curiosity, sometimes hope, occasionally folly, but always human. The night now rests gently over rooftops. The air cools. Nothing urgent remains. No wool spinning. No dice tumbling. Only the faint memory of a ball clicking against wood, of coins stacked neatly, of a numbered ticket folded carefully between fingers. The fire dims. The city breathes. The story drifts forward again, carried now not by horse or caravan, but by sail. The Atlantic rolls slowly beneath tall-masted ships. Wooden hulls creak softly as wind presses into canvas. In cramped quarters below deck, men sit on overturned crates, passing time as only sailors know how. Dice clatter gently against the planks. The sound is familiar. It has echoed in Roman camps, in medieval taverns, in Venetian halls. And now it travels west.